morning. It's June 10th, and we are located at Valor Academy High School. Our names are
Sankirt Vutikuri,
Andrew Morales,
and Valerie Medina.
Today, our podcast topic will be about systemic discrimination. We will investigate how systemic discrimination affects minorities' opportunities.
People ask, what is systemic discrimination? Systemic discrimination is patterns of behavior, policies, or practices that are part of an organization and which create or perpetuate disadvantage for racialized persons.
Today, we have brought in Mr. Ramirez and Coach Thomas to speak upon this topic.
Yo, what's Gucci? This is Mr. Ramirez. I give my group full and all honest consent to record.
All right. So our first question is, do you know what systemic discrimination is?
Leave him alone. Yes, I do understand what systemic discrimination is. And let me just say that I have also experienced it myself, but systemic discrimination pretty much is when there's a system put in place by society, whether it's educational, workforce, or even our daily lives, and one set of, group gets discriminated or actually belittled or oppressed by the system in general.
Our next question is, do you think or believe that systemic discrimination exists in the U.S. still?
I highly believe that systemic discrimination exists, and you can actually see it in the U.S. now, because there's still certain aspects in our society that have yet to change when it comes to oppressing certain races, certain groups, certain individuals, to be able to achieve higher ranks either in the workforce, higher occupations for females that are male-dominated, or even higher levels of education due to all the barriers that are put in the educational system.
Our next question is, have you ever been systemically discriminated?
Yes, I have. I think that being a Latino male in the city of LA, just even growing up and, the LAUSD educational system, there was always these barriers that were set, maybe not explicitly set by the LAUSD codes, but you can tell that, the educators that were trying to give me an education at the time, had a sort of bias when it came to how much we knew of the topics. And they will always say, of course, these brown kids.
All right. Really quick, what changes do you think need to be implemented in order to bring change?
I think there should be a level of change in the educational system. I think just understanding the communities that we serve, so therefore our communities that we're serving or the communities that we work in, our youth can just have that voice, start making that change, start paving the new way so that we can eventually hit those in power.
All right. Thank you for taking this time to let us interview you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Good morning, Coach Thomas.
Good morning.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to interview you. Do you give us consent to record this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so our first question is, do you know what systemic discrimination is?
Yes, I do.
Would you like to tell us what it is?
Well, it'd be easier for me to just describe how it's affected the people I'm aware of. The two biggest ways would be business, and I guess the second would be the judicial system. And what I mean by that is for doing the exact same crimes, minorities tend to have a lot more time than non-minorities.
Do you think that systemic discrimination still exists today?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
The next question we have for you is, have you ever been systemically discriminated?
Unwittingly, yes.
Can you describe how?
The quickest way would be I wanted to play ball for a school. And it turns out, I found out later, that under their unofficial rules, they couldn't have any more than 2 blacks at a time. They were never allowed to tell me that, and of course that wasn't the reason why I was denied the opportunity, but later I found that to be what was true.
What changes do you think need to be implemented in order to bring change?
Minorities climbing the ladder, which means when you have a diverse amount of people making decisions, it tends to cover the entire population instead of the small amount of people who are presently making decisions who only care about their own interests.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for letting us interview you.
You are very welcome.
As discussed, systemic discrimination affects minorities such as Hispanics and African Americans in the areas of jobs, housing, and the criminal justice system.
The American Psychological Association reports on systemic discrimination in the workforce. They report that African American unemployment rates are typically double that of Caucasian Americans. African American men working full-time earn only 72% of the average earnings of comparable Caucasian men and 85% of the earnings of Caucasian women. This shows that African American men don't get paid equally compared to Caucasian men and women. Based off of evidence, typically white households make $70,000 per year, while blacks or Hispanic households only make $40,000 to $50,000 per year. This shows that minorities aren't treated equally in the workforce and are oppressed in the workforce.
In addition to minorities being systemically discriminated in jobs, they are also discriminated against in housing. For example, researchers shows that 42.2% of blacks households own homes in 2015 compared with 70.8% of white households. This shows that African Americans don't have the same opportunity to buy appropriate houses. Often people who sell houses prefer white buyers, which shows how the system discriminates minorities.
The area where systemic discrimination affects minorities the most is in the criminal justice system. Many minorities, such as African Americans, are assumed to be criminals even though they have nothing to do with the crime. A study was conducted where people were lined up and police were asked who is the criminal. In a majority of the instances, black or Hispanic people were chosen as the criminal. As clearly described, the system has been developed to where minorities are openly discriminated and more likely to be sent to jail. Our system has been influenced to assume minorities as criminals, although many white people may actually have done harm. Opponents of systemic discrimination argue that systemic discrimination is not even a real concept. They claim that minorities are jailed at such a high rate because they are committing crimes at a high rate. But in fact, this is false. Statistics show that out of 1,900 wrongful convictions since 1989, about 50% of them were involved with African Americans and African Americans being jailed. Once again, the system has wrongly assumed one a criminal, which has brought up claims that systemic discrimination is make-believe. But in reality, systemic discrimination is a scary and evident truth.
Some solutions to systemic discrimination is establishing quotas in housing and requiring each race to have a certain percentage of home ownership. In addition, more minorities should move up the ladder in terms of high positions in society, which will reduce the racial stereotyping of the current system.
Thank you for listening. Now signing off from Valor Academy High School, this is Sankir,
Andrew.
And Valerie.